I was beyond furious when she burst through the door 3 hours late. Where the hell have you been? I had to pick up Chad and take him to school. Bobby's freaking out and I have to go to work. She only shrugged. Bill wanted us to work for a couple hours. Even paid us cash so Uncle Sam wouldn't get his greedy paws on them. That'll make up for the time you missed, and Bob already said you were the best he's ever had. He'll get over it. The phone stopped working? You could have at least given me a heads up. Sorry, wasn't thinking. I have to go to bed and you have to go to work. I'll make us a nice dinner to make up for it. She didn't give me a chance to respond before she headed for the bedroom. I considered following her, but I knew that would lead to one hell of an argument, and I really needed to get to work. I was halfway to my place of work when it hit me. She smirked slightly when she said she was done with work. Something was wrong, and had been for a while. I put it out of my mind. It takes focus to work with saws and nailers. It was 1983, and we were in the middle of a mild recession. I was laid off, and my unemployment check wasn't very big. Then Gail got laid off, and that really hamstrung us. Things were tight, very tight. We were looking, but everyone else was in the same boat, and the jobs just weren't there, especially for her. She had dropped out of school in 10th grade, and she wasn't offered much. Her last job was minimum wage, but it was all she could get, and we needed money to survive. Then I got lucky. I got a call from a friend I hadn't seen in years. Bobby and I had worked construction together in the late 70s. He always said we were a good team, and he was sorry to see me go, but I had a good opportunity, and I couldn't pass it up. He stayed in construction and eventually started his own small business, mostly doing real estate repair and maintenance, although he occasionally built houses. While everyone else was struggling, he was doing well thanks to service contracts. His biggest client owned most of the rental properties in one county and a few more in another, and she was keeping him busy. Mac, man, Jack said you got fired. I just lost a couple guys and thought of you. You want to help me out part-time? Damn right. He gave me directions to his next project and told me to be there at 7. After we hugged, he asked me if I remembered how to hang siding. Oh, I could probably fake that. He grinned, gave me 2 helpers, and let me go. The rest of the guys weren't particularly motivated, which I thought was odd in the busy time we were in, but I kept up with them, and we finished the job in 2 days. He assigned me to replace windows in a couple of rental apartments. By the end of the week, I had 35 hours of work. He handed me checks, and I was shocked when I looked at it. It was half of what I was owed. He just grinned and told me to meet him at the bar, a small place where mostly construction workers worked. I walked in, he bought me a beer and handed me a pool cue. We're going to play a game of pool. I'm going to lose. When I lose, I'll pay you the bet we made. Oddly enough, that's exactly what it would be if I paid you for all the hours I've worked. He grinned when he saw the look on my face. Look, you told me you could make $60 and still get a full unemployment check, right? I nodded, and he continued. Now, the amount I paid you is a little less than what you could make. That way, you still get a full check and some money they don't know about. We won't always use that amount. It will exceed it from time to time, and most of the time it will be less. I figure I will pay you a full check about once every 6 weeks. You will lose the check that week, but the state will be satisfied. Of course, you can act like a good citizen and report everything. Your choice. I thought about this while sipping a beer. I had been to the unemployment office twice. Both times I was treated like a number and felt insignificant. And while I know they were overwhelmed, the employees were downright rude, not just to me, but to everyone. Screw them! You need to practice. Your pool game sucks. He only grinned. Next chapter. I was about to share the happy news with Gail, but when I got home, she was already worked up. Where the hell have you been? Do I smell beer? We don't have money for you to drink. It took a few deep breaths before I could answer. I went to the bar where Bobby hangs out to get my money. I had 1 beer and he paid for it. Now we got a little break on the bills. I've got a little extra. I was about to say cash, but she spoke to me, telling me that a few hours here and there wouldn't help, and I needed to get a real job. What did you have for lunch today? I hope it was something solid, Because I need you to pitch me a good job because I'm not going to find one any other way. How about you? Did you find anything? You know no one wants to hire a high school graduate. Well, then you need to take advantage of the program they offered you and get a high school diploma. It will help, if not now, then in the future. You keep complaining about staying home. You could go out in the evenings and I could watch Chad. Think about it. She didn't like that for some reason and turned around and walked away. I went out to the backyard and started playing with our son. He was in first grade and the world was a wonderland to him. He would tell me about what he had learned during the day and I couldn't help but smile. He was a good kid, and even if I had to sacrifice something, I made sure he had good clothes and shoes for school and money when he needed it for special things like a field trip to the aviary. By the time we were done playing, Gail had already made the food. We ate a lot of macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, but we didn't leave hungry. I never got around to telling Gail about the money under the table. I just took it and paid the electric bill. One day, a few weeks later, I came home and she kissed me hard. This surprised me because she had been a little stingy with them lately. Guess what? I got a job. She had made a very nice dinner and was dressed in short shorts and a loosely tied halter, one of her playful outfits. I smiled, thinking life was getting better. That's wonderful, honey. What is it? Let's eat first. Get Chad settled for the night, and I'll tell you all about it. I frowned slightly. What was so mysterious about work? We had pork chops, which was rare this year. It was delicious, the cake was even better, and after Chad took a bath and told me about himself, she pulled out a couple of my favorite beers. I stopped buying them a few months ago because they were a little pricey. I was starting to feel very uncomfortable. She poured the mugs and settled across from my chair. Honey, do you remember Honey? Yes, I remembered Honey. She was one of her friends when we were dating, and frankly, a bit of a slut. I'm not a prude. What a woman does with her life usually doesn't concern me. Sweetie, however, seemed to have no boundaries. She was outspoken to the point of impossibility and wasn't bent on proposing to husbands in front of their wives, if she had some. She tried to propose to me twice and Gail found it amusing. She tried again when Gail wasn't around. I pretended to be interested and let her lead us away to a quiet place. She leaned in to kiss me, but then... Listen carefully, bitch. You snuggle up to me one more time and I will shatter your world. I'll feign remorse and swear it was an accident, but every time after that, if you ever think of hitting on a man in a relationship, you'll think twice. Is that clear? She sobbed heavily and shook her head in agreement. That was the last time I'd seen her, or heard anything about her until now. The feeling of unease was building in huge leaps and bounds. As far as I could remember, she had been directly involved in 7 divorce proceedings, mostly as the second woman. I just nodded. Well, I ran into her at the store the other day, and when we met and she found out I wasn't working, she offered me a job. What kind of job? Does it involve being horizontal? Gail blushed. No, asshole, it doesn't involve. For your information, she's married now and works for her cousin. He owns a motel in Charlotte and she works the night shift, 9 to 6. He always makes his night shift clerks work in pairs, and the woman she works with quit. Why did she quit? How would I know? The thing is, she quit, and the pay there is pretty good. $10 an hour. For someone used to making $6.65 an hour, that seemed like real money. I tried to be diplomatic. That's not a bad paycheck, Gail, but frankly, I'm not very comfortable. Is the motel in a nice part of town? Is it a good place to spend the night, or is it a dump? You'll be working in the middle of the night when all the crazies are out on the street. I'd hate to see you get hurt or killed for $10 an hour. And frankly, I'm not thrilled about you working with Honey. She's changed. A lot. She has a husband and a 2-year-old girl. Honey's no longer the woman we both remembered. Besides, the cops patrol here quite a bit, and we're pretty safe. I promise the first time I get a bad feeling and I'll leave. We talked some more about Chad and how this would affect him. I leave at 6. I can be home by 6:45, make you breakfast, take him to school, and then come home and sleep. That way I can spend the evening with my two favorite men before they go to bed, and I have to go to work. We talked and agreed to discuss this later. Next chapter. Gail talked me into inviting Honey and her family over for dinner. I have to admit that she looked very different from what I remembered. Her hair was done up, she was wearing a conservative top and pants, and she was pleasant. Her husband seemed like a nice guy. I wondered if he knew about her past. Her little girl was adorable, and Chad was immediately enamored with her. While I was grilling, he ended up in the backyard and let her wander around the neighborhood, keeping up with her. Gail and Honey laughed. If he's as enamored when they grow up, we can be mothers-in-law. It was a pleasant evening. After the meal, the girl lay down for a nap, and Chad fell asleep on the floor. Her husband Jeff went to the bathroom, and Gail went to the kitchen for a beer. I took the opportunity. Honey, do you remember that little conversation we had right before Gail and I got married? Her eyes widened and she rubbed her neck in embarrassment. That was a long time ago. I've changed. I have to admit, I like the new Honey a lot better than the old Honey, but I want you to remember something. If anything happens to Gail, anything bad, and I think you had something to do with it, I'll honor my promise. Remember that. Jeff returned, and Gail came out with the beer. They stayed for about another hour or so before they left. No sooner were the taillights out of sight than she started asking questions. Have you seen how much she's changed? Hard to believe. I never thought she'd be married and with a baby. I always thought if she got pregnant back then, half the men in the neighborhood would be sweating. She punched me in the ribs. That was a harsh thing to say. Maybe, but it would still be pretty accurate. Come on, clean yourself up and go to bed. I thought about everything the next morning as I mowed the grass. Sweetie, despite all her past flaws, was an attractive woman. After all, I didn't resist when she got the job, but still made her make a bunch of promises and still worried about her. I was awake when she came home after her first day on the job. How did it go? Boring as hell. There's not much going on in the motel late at night. Everyone's asleep except for a few party people who come in after the bars close, but they don't usually make a lot of noise. It's easy money, honey. She came home with her first check, happy beyond belief. We decided that we would spend her first month's income to pay the bills, and then start saving most of it to find a house. I worked with Bobby more and more, and found that I enjoyed it more than I remembered. Bobby begged me to go full-time if I didn't find anything by the time my unemployment benefits ran out. We were still gaming the system. We got part of our paycheck through reports and the rest under the table. I started putting half of the money away in a savings account, planning to use it for Gail and Chad's vacation trip. It would be our first vacation in 4 years, and Chad had never seen the ocean, so I wanted to take him to the beach. For about 4 months, everything went well. One day, Gail came in and said that the maid working the third shift had quit, and she and Honey were going to make some extra money cleaning empty rooms. One would work the desk and the other would clean, and they would alternate days. Does that mean you'll be sitting at the desk by yourself? Honey, no one, and I mean no one, comes to the table after midnight. Besides, we have walkie-talkies that we carry with us, so if someone comes to the front desk that we don't like, we'll call each other. Everything will be fine. The extra money did come in handy. One day, Gail came in with a battered face. I asked, and she shrugged. Rough night. The guys from the convention came over and they left the rooms a mess. I was up all night cleaning toilets and carpets. Could you make Chad breakfast today? I knew what a bad day was like, so I helped Chad get ready for school while she showered and went to bed. For a few days she was depressed, but then she seemed to perk up. As the weeks went by, she seemed to change. At first, it was little things. She stopped talking about her job except to say that it was the same old, same old. She also started dressing better. I complimented her, and that seemed to make her happy. I felt a little guilty spending money, but I needed clothes. I took some of the extra money I make and upgraded it. Again, that little smirk I'd noticed lately, like she knew a joke I didn't. It was starting to bother me. Then the changes started in the bedroom. We usually made love 3 times a week if our schedules allowed. Mostly it was on weekends, but 2 or 3 times a week, especially on Thursdays, she developed a habit of pouncing on me right after Chad went to bed. She was a little more aggressive than before, especially orally, both receiving and giving. I finally asked her about this change. She looked stunned, and it took her a minute to answer. I've never talked to you about it, but there's a lot to see at the motel. There are a few couples who come every 2 weeks or so who like to leave the doors open or venture into the pool. Plus, they tend not to date the same man every week. I had to think for a minute. Isn't that dangerous for a motel? What about cops, irate spouses, and the like? I was beginning to dislike the thought of her continuing to work at the motel. Then the insolence started, the minimizing of our family time. I asked her what was wrong. I'm just tired of fighting. It seems like every dime we get takes something away. Wouldn't it be nice to do what we like when we want to, like we used to when we had bills and a baby? Everybody has fantasies. Yes, I'd love to. But the reality is, we have bills and a baby. Do you want to drop everything? Drop Chad off somewhere and run away? I don't think so. Things are getting better, honey. Our bills are paid, and we're even saving a little. I'm thinking about going full-time with Bobby. He'll give me a raise and more hours if I accept. It hit me when she mocked the idea. You think that's going to make a difference? You need a job where there's insurance. We're all healthy now, but one accident would bankrupt us for years. I sighed. It is what it is, Gail. Until we find a new profession that pays a lot more, we'll have to work with what we have. There was that little smirk again. Next chapter. It all came crashing down one day when I needed a pen. Chad didn't like lugging anything he could write with into his room. He was an aspiring artist, and his artwork covered every inch of our refrigerator. He was asleep, and I didn't want to wake him up, so I decided to grab one pen from Gail's purse. I stayed out of her purse because she stuffed it full of junk and it annoyed me. I took the pen and grinned at the weight of it. Well, pens were usually at the very top. I opened it and sat for a minute. It was full of money. A lot of money. I pulled it out and counted it. $2,300, a respectable amount for the time. I heard Gail wake up, so I shoved the money back in and put her purse on the floor next to the couch. I sat there thinking while she babbled on. There was no way that money was legitimate. I decided not to say anything. Friday night, I would follow her to work. Honey, Chad is going to be with your parents on Friday. Bobby and I are going fishing. He found a spot on the lake and he swears all the catfish he's pulled out of there are over 10 pounds. She smiled. Go ahead. Have a good time, and I'm looking forward to salt and pepper catfish for dinner on Sunday. Catch a big one for me. She wanted to play and looked disappointed when I waved her off. I pulled something at work today. I think I need an ice pack or a back warmer. Gail was immediately concerned and brought me pain pills, an ice pack, and a heating pad plugged into an outlet next to the chair. She kissed me when he left. Get some rest, sweetheart. Don't go to work tomorrow. We can afford to take the day off. I'll check on you when I get home. She called me later, which she rarely did, to check on me. I told her I was feeling much better and wasn't going to do anything but painting tomorrow, so I'd be fine at work. She grumbled a bit, told me to take the day off, told me she loved me, and hung up. The next day, I was very ineffective at work. Bobby finally told us to head out for lunch. Come on, Mac, I'm buying. We sat down at the little diner he favored, and after we ordered, he told me to lay out everything that was bothering me or he would send me home. I really needed someone to talk to, so I told him about the money and her general attitude. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to go to the motel tomorrow night and see what's going on. Bobby sighed. Do you remember Jefferson George? Of course I remember. He was the richest kid in school. His dad had more money than half the town combined. I caught him with a 14-year-old girl he gave some liquor to and tried to get her into his car. She was pretty drunk, but she resisted as best she could. Finally, he got fed up with it and slapped her. Get in the car, bitch, and shut up. He didn't realize there was anyone else around, so I gave him a pat on the shoulder. He looked around, told me to back off, and started to get in the car. The girl was my cousin. I almost completely destroyed him. His dad practically owned the police department, and someone called 911. I've often thought I was luckier than my wits, and that was more true than ever, because the state trooper had pulled the car over within sight and had just finished writing the ticket when the call came in. He took one look at the girl and Jefferson and called an ambulance. He then took statements from all the witnesses, but they were afraid to lie to him because he wasn't local. The local police showed up and wanted to take matters into their own hands, but Trooper stopped them. Sorry, guys. I've already started the paperwork, so he's mine. I'll bring him down to the station for questioning when I'm done, and you can do your own investigation. They didn't like that very much, but they had no choice. He asked around, found out who my friends were, and told Bobby to find a phone and call my folks. Tell them to get down to the station as soon as possible. They might want to call a lawyer. He took his time, but eventually he had to put me in his car. There was no love lost between the state and the locals. I later learned that they were investigating the police department for corruption and abuse of power. He talked to me as he drove the car. Listen, kid, there are things going on here that you don't know about. I'm going to drop you off at the station. Don't say anything to anyone. Is the place clear? All right. Your parents will hopefully be there before us, but just in case, refuse to be questioned until they get there. We arrived before my parents, so the policeman was in no hurry to release me to the locals. He pulled out an Instamatic camera and took some pictures. The policeman waiting to process me asked him why. Because there are no bruises or contusions on the boy. If they show up later, I'll be forced to investigate. Do you understand what I'm saying? The policeman didn't like that, but he couldn't say anything. My parents and Uncle Pete walked through the door. The policeman asked for identification and released me to them. I won't press charges until the investigation is complete. My advice is to keep the kid close to home for a few days. We were about to head out the door when 2 police officers stopped us. Not so fast. We're taking him into custody. You can post bail for him on Monday. What's he being charged with? The state started an investigation and released him to his parents. I think the state is more in charge than the city, if I remember the law correctly. Since I'm a lawyer, I'm sure it is. They changed tactics. He's not under arrest. We just want to question him. For 2 days? That won't work. I'll bring him in for questioning Monday morning. I will be present for your interrogation. All questions will go through me. Is that clear? I have orders. Then find me the person who gave the order. If you can't within a reasonable time, we're going home. There were a lot of whispers and phone calls, but an hour later, we were home. Dad wrote a check and handed it to his brother-in-law. Here, that's the fee. He laughed and tore the check open. Write me one for $5. I'm tired of losing cases to corrupt cops. Maybe this case will make a difference. When the smoke cleared, no one had been charged. Mr. Moneybags gave up when he read the report on the alcohol levels of his son, the girl, and the witness statements. Jefferson was not well liked, and many witnesses said he threw the first punch. He got his revenge. We were both expelled, and my son was sent to boarding school to finish his studies. I couldn't walk across the stage and had to go to summer school to get my diploma. Bobby brought me back to the present, and I nodded. Then remember what it took for you to screw it up. I know you. There's no planning for you. You just rush in, cursing torpedoes. You need to stop and think when you find out what's going on. Don't do anything stupid. Remember Chad? You need to make sure nothing happens to him. He was right, damn it. You're right, but I have to do something. Tomorrow we'll go to that motel and check it out. If we see anything amiss, we'll think it over before we react. Tell me you understand. It was the best plan possible, and I agreed. Next chapter. We parked in an empty parking lot across from the motel at 11 p.m. on Friday night. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. It wasn't a dump, but it wasn't the best option either. I was surprised at how full the parking lot was. We had binoculars and I could make out Honey behind the counter, but Gail was nowhere to be seen. At 11:30, a woman who looked a lot like Gail came out of the motel and headed across the parking lot to the strip club. I was halfway out of the car when Bobby pulled me back in. Sit tight. She hasn't seen me more than a few times, so I'm going to put this cap on and go see what's going on. Don't get out of the car. 90 minutes later, he came back, looking a little pale and damn uncomfortable. He sat for a minute before he spoke. She's a dancer, Mac. Her stage name is Desiree, and she's pretty good at it. I saw her perform, and then she came out and took 3 guys into the back room. The bouncer told me that's all they allow inside, but the women have an agreement with the motel, and as long as they don't go off company property, they don't say anything. I asked Desiree, and he laughed. She's all booked up for the day, and she doesn't work on weekends. I think she has a kid she sees during that time. Next week, she works Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the following week, she works Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She and a girl named Honey take turns. I think she works at the motel on the nights she doesn't work here. Would you like me to set you up? I held out $50 to him. I'd like Wednesday, but I don't know if I can make it. If I'm not here by midnight, I'm not coming. She's pretty expensive, man. $25 for the interview, $50 for full service, and $1 for any extras you might want. I think he said that because he thought I might be a cop. I handed him another $50. Here. If I don't show up on time, this will be free money for her. While we talked, Gail walked out of the club with a man under her arm and headed straight for the motel, waving to Honey as she passed. By 3 o'clock, she'd made 2 more runs. I went numb as Bobby started his truck. We've seen enough. You need to calm down and think about what you want to do. Let's go fishing. What? We have to fish, don't forget. Besides, what's better than making plans on a deserted lake in the middle of the night? And so we fished. Even caught a few. But mostly we talked. What are you going to do? Divorce her. I don't see any other way out. I need to keep Chad safe. I don't want him to find out what she's doing. Okay, we need to gather evidence and catch her in the act, so to speak. Any ideas? I have to tell you that I think the local cops are in on this. We saw her drive through the parking lot 3 times, remember? They must know what's going on. That's when I remembered the trooper. He had been instrumental in eliminating the local cops, and because of that, he had been promoted to SBI. Now he was mostly involved in corruption cases. I saw him in the papers from time to time. I think I know someone who can help. I managed to survive the weekend. She made herself comfortable and gave Chad a little more attention than usual. He had really been missing his mother lately. That made what I had to do even more difficult. I called first thing Monday, explained who I was, and said I had some information I thought he needed. They connected me about 20 minutes later. He remembered me, and we talked about the past for a few minutes, after which he asked how he could help me. I told him the whole story, including the fact that one of the prostitutes was my wife and that we think the local police were involved. He listened, and I could see he was taking notes. Can you meet me and my partner there tonight? I had to take Chad to my in-laws' house, telling them it was urgent. We met at the waffle shop and talked. He introduced his partner, an attractive red-headed girl, and offered to go undercover together in their car. I thought it would be a bulky 4-door labeled Undercover Cop, but it was actually a nice 3-year-old T-Bird. They grinned when they saw my face. We confiscated it while busting traffickers a couple years ago. That's how we get most of our undercover vehicles. We change every month. The next one will be a Firebird. The Lieutenant Brown I knew laughed. Yeah, and when we do, I'm behind the wheel. Detective Walters has the lead leg. As we got into position, they exchanged good-natured banter. I singled out Gail and Honey. They watched as Honey entered the club. The first to come out was Brown. I'll go in there, see as much as I can find out. Then Tubby will come in. We talked while we waited. Wouldn't it be awkward going into a place like this? She laughed. I worked for 3 years while I was in college, but that's all I did. I never even did a lap dance. I've seen too many relationships ruined while I was working to ever give in to temptation. I show up, try to interview with the manager, tell him I'm moving to the area in a few weeks, and try to find a job. She had just finished telling me about her lawyer husband and 2 daughters. Seeing my face, she smiled. My husband knows. We met at a club. He worked at the law school as a bartender and bouncer. He knows I never dated guys, and I know he never touched any of the girls working, even though they saw him as a challenge and tried hard. Eventually, I had to report him to get them to back off. We decided to go on a few dates to prove it and never looked back. It's been 7 years now, and we're still as happy as we were on our wedding day. She looked at me sadly. Don't judge your wife just yet. She may have been forced into it. I've seen it happen. If that's the case, I strongly suggest you see a psychologist and try to save your marriage. If, however, she is doing this of her own free will, well, how it ends is entirely up to you. Brown came back and didn't smile. I've got the same information as your buddy. There are about half a dozen girls involved. Looks like a pretty big prostitution ring. There's a picture of your wife hanging on the wall. If there's a red cross with a circle around it at the bottom, that means she's available for additional services. Tabby, you're free to go. She was gone for about 30 minutes. Back in the car, she didn't look happy. This place is little more than a brothel. I met with the manager, showed him my old pictures and told him I was moving in and would be free in 5 weeks. The creep admitted that a lot of his girls had gotten hooked, but he turned a blind eye. He also tried to get me to give him my head as a goodwill gesture. I just grinned and said, "We'll look into it as soon as I get a job. Right now, I really need a shower." They took me back to the diner. That's the end of your involvement. I'm sorry, kid. It's clear you loved her. So what happens now? We're going to put together a small team. It'll be a month or so before we get into action. Keep an eye out for it in the papers. The strip club, the local cops, and the motel will go down. We'll shut down the strip club for solicitation, the motel for running a brothel, and the cops will lose their jobs and be prosecuted. I have to tell you, all the women involved will be charged with multiple counts of prostitution, and it will become public knowledge. The only upside is that you have a good reputation and a steady job, and judges don't like to award child custody to prostitutes if there is a decent alternative. You're going to get a divorce, aren't you? I have to. I can't forgive her, and I can't subject a 6-year-old to that lifestyle. Tabby reached out and touched my arm. We usually try to stay out of divorce cases so we don't make the news, but if you need us, we're sure your attorney can arrange for a deposition in chambers. That's when it hit me. Damn, there's no way I'm going to be able to act normal for that amount of time. I'm just not that good at it. What can I do? Brown grinned. This is going to be a pretty big case. We don't want it to fall apart too soon. You said you worked construction? Let's see what we can do. Try to hold out for a few days and we'll get back to you. True to our word, 2 days later, we were offered a short-term contract to help build a new prison halfway across the state. Not counting what was going on, they were offering a hell of a lot of money, and even under normal circumstances, it would have been hard to turn down. Bobby knew what was going on. He knew why we got the contract, but he didn't care. I told Gail that same night. Good news. You know we're trying to figure out how to make more money. Bobby got a job offer from an old friend. His project is behind schedule and he's facing fines if he doesn't finish on time. We'll be making half as much as we are now. It will be 7 days a week for a month, but including overtime it will be about as much as I make in 4. I have to do it, honey. It could lead to great opportunities in the future. Surprisingly, she was not happy and tried to talk me out of it. I made every argument she had ever made to improve our situation, and that seemed to stall her excuses for me staying home. It's only for a month, dear. I'd hate to go that long without loving you, but think of it when I get home. A whole month without him. We'll be sore as hell for the first few days. Gail fell silent, knowing she couldn't do without it. I arranged for her parents and mine to help her, gave her and Chad a big kiss, and left. I wasn't lying about the overtime. They were so behind, they were happy to let us work 7 days a week. It was a new minimum security prison, and the cells were built to look more like dorms. The only difference was that there was no kitchen, and the cells were 8 by 8, and each had a sink and a toilet. It was a plumbing nightmare. We did siding and roofing. They were the biggest buildings I had ever sheathed, and we were able to sheathe and roof 2 houses a week. When we arrived, there were only 6 left to do, so by the last week, we were looking for something to do. Bobby led the masonry crew, and I helped with the plumbers. Crawling under those buildings was annoying, but the plumbing contractor was paying me extra to lead the crew. After 4.5 weeks, all that needed to be done was to put a fence around the property. It didn't look like a prison without the fence, and the general contractor told me that it was done on purpose so that inmates were less likely to try to escape. I asked him if it worked. Escape attempts are reported to be down 44% in places built like this. There are still enough dumbasses, so they have to put up a fence and keep guards, but the staff is pleased with the results. I called home from the payphone twice a week, and we usually talked for about 30 minutes. Chad would update me on everything that had happened to him since we last talked and ask when I was coming home. Gail would talk about general things and ask when I was coming home. I told her that next week was my last week and I would be home next Tuesday. Every now and then I would ask a question about her job and she would wave it off. The last time we talked, she surprised me. "I'm thinking of quitting, honey. I'm tired of not being able to sleep next to you every night. Plus, I can feel us drifting apart. I don't want that, honey. I still love you." That was something new. I called Brown. "I'm glad you called. I was just about to call you. Watch the news Friday night. That's when it's going to happen." I was silent for a moment, and he noticed it. "Change your mind?" "Yeah. I've loved her for a long time, you know. It's going to be hard on our baby." "Yes. But if we want to guarantee custody, this is the only way to do it. We're not charging her. She has no criminal record. If she finds a favorable judge, you'll be a part-time father. You really don't want her to get custody. I'll tell you about it later, but things have changed." Friday night, I called to hear her voice one last time. "I've been thinking. Maybe you should stay home tonight. I'll come home, we'll grab Chad, and we'll be at the beach in 3 hours. Think how happy he'll be. Think how happy we'll be." There was a moment of silence before she spoke. "It's too late to fill in for anyone, and I don't want Honey to be there alone. I'll come home Saturday and take a nap while you get everything set up. We can leave by 1 o'clock and be at the beach by 5. Let's try to spend a week there, honey. It'll do us good." I sighed. I tried. "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow." "I'm looking forward to it. We have a lot to catch up on. I have to go now. I love you." "I love you too." I wondered if she understood what I said. That night, Bobby and I watched the evening news at 11 o'clock. We were in a different market, but the news was in the state-by-state news section. Tonight, the Prostitution Task Force conducted a major raid at the Dreamland Motel in Charlotte, North Carolina, and dismantled a large prostitution ring. 14 people were arrested, including the motel owner and 2 night managers. The owner is for providing a place for prostitution, and the managers appear to have been part of the network. The manager of Fantastic Ladies, an erotic entertainment lounge next to the motel, was also arrested in the investigation, although his charges have not been made public. There are also unsubstantiated rumors that he was involved in human trafficking. As the reporter spoke, people could be seen being led out of the motel to the police van. Bobby looked at me. "I'm sorry, man. I know how much you loved her. You know you had to do it that way for Chad's sake. You know, when everyone tells you you did the right thing, and you know you did the right thing, why do you feel like shit when you do it? Because usually the right thing to do always turns out to be the hardest thing to do. You didn't know when you married Gail, or when she went to work at the motel, that this would happen. Bad shit happens to good people. How they handle it shows their character. Now I'm gonna leave you alone. Cry, scream, break shit if you want. Just try to spout off enough so you can function when it's time to go home to your child. I know I shouldn't say this, but I'm right there with you, bro." As he walked away, I tried to cry. I thought about going to the store and buying a bottle. I thought about beating the walls in the motel room. In the end, I didn't do any of those things. I just sat there, dazed, for the rest of the night. Bobby found me and, without saying a word, turned on the shower and practically pushed me inside. The hot water hit me and I cried, bitter tears of betrayal and loss. When I got out, I felt much better. Let's go. You drive. I slept most of the way home. Next chapter. Their bail was set at $2,000 each. She had the money in a secret account, but she couldn't access it, and there was no way in hell I was going to pay it. The longer she stayed in jail, the more certain it was that I would get custody of Chad. The kid didn't understand. I tried to explain things to him as best I could. Son, your mother got involved with some bad people and did some bad things. Now she doesn't want to live with us, so we are on our own. She still loves you, but right now she just can't be with us. So she's coming home later? I don't know, son. We'll see. I did my best, trying to reassure him that Mom wouldn't be living with us anymore. I was glad it was the beginning of summer. I know how cruel kids can be, and I hoped that by the time school started again, this whole story would be out of everyone's head. Both grandparents helped look after Chad while I worked. We usually had dinner with whoever had him staying with them. It was very awkward with her parents at first. They apologized for Gail, but I blew them off. She made her choice, and that made me make mine. I need you to realize that your daughter and I have no future together. None. But it was her choice, not yours. Chad loves you, and I will never come between you and your grandson. If it makes any difference, I've always thought the best of you. If you ever feel uncomfortable around me, or if it gets too hard for you to hold Chad, let me know. Her dad just looked sad, and her mom hugged me and burst into tears. When she pulled away, she said she would wait for Chad in the morning and me in the afternoon. Tomorrow is meatloaf. I hugged her again and shook his hand, wondering as I left how they were dealing with the stigma of what Gail had done. It was a small town after all. One could only hope it didn't have too many small people. It took her 10 days to get out of jail. By then, I had packed all of her belongings into boxes and put them in my parents' garage. Along with the divorce papers, I sent her a letter telling her to stay away from me and that sometime in the future, after the divorce, I wanted to ask her why. She immediately went to her parents' house when she was finally free. I don't know what kind of reception she was hoping for, but they let her know that she had 2 weeks and then she had to leave. Rumor had it that she and Honey had rented an apartment in Charlotte. I thought it was good that they deserved each other. Lieutenant Brown called me a week later. I thought you'd like to get an update and find out when this all goes to trial. After they got out of jail, we made it clear to them that if they left the state, we would prosecute them. Both she and her partner live in the same apartment. They don't work at the motel or the club because they were confiscated by the city, but they have found work at other clubs. I don't know if there are extras, but I don't think there are. If they get caught prostituting again before trial, it could turn out very badly for them. I highly doubt they will get jail time, and if they do, it will probably be 3 to 6 months. The motel owner and the club manager are facing more serious charges. I doubt either of them will be able to get their property back. The DA is running for office this year, so he'll have his hands full with them. I think both of them are looking at a couple years. They could have gotten more, but they made a deal and gave up 3 different dealers. We're trying to keep it quiet, because if word gets out, they won't last a week in jail. Her arrest and probable sentence will become public knowledge, and that should help you keep custody of your child. I'm sorry your life has turned out this way, but I'm sure the girls we rescue from traffickers will be grateful. We've tracked them through 4 states and all the way to Mexico. Check out the news. What you see is a direct result of you coming to us. We can't thank you enough. Over the next few months, there were several stories about traffickers, but I was too preoccupied with my situation to pay attention. She found a lawyer and tried to block the divorce, and no one, including her attorney, could figure out why. I used Uncle Pete, and he said the case was open and shut. Her lawyer was pretty good, and we had some serious conversations. Oddly enough, one of them involved money. She wanted half and full unsupervised visitation if she didn't get custody. We met at her attorney's office. It was the first time I'd seen her in 4 months. She looked like a completely different person. Her hair, her eyes, her clothes, everything was a far cry from what she wore when we were married. I guess she wasn't a bad businesswoman. Always promoting a product, Pete began. I think we've done more than fair. He wants 70% of the assets, no matter how small, and he's giving up alimony rights. How can that be unfair? Her lawyer was a slick guy, and I knew she must be paying him a fortune. This is just unacceptable. She wants 50% and full custody and a fair amount of alimony. Pete objected. 50-50, he gets custody rights to the child and will have supervised visitation for the first time. If Mrs. Stoneman proves herself trustworthy, the supervision can be revoked. In addition, she will be required to pay child support. The lawyer began to speak as Pete laid out the bank statement. 50-50 includes this money, an account that was not disclosed during the investigation. There was $14,000 in it the day our clients parted ways, and no judge in the world would have objected. Whoever we got caught would pay no attention to the fact that that money happened to be missing from the financial records. Gail turned pale. She didn't know her secret account had been discovered. Just before she was arrested, I went through her purse again and found the bank book. I pulled it out and photographed it, capturing the account numbers and routing. I guess her lawyer didn't know about it either, judging by the look on his face. The lawyer asked for a later appointment. For the first time, I said, "No. Take it or leave it, Gail. If you fight, a lot of dirty secrets will come out that you don't think I know about. By the time I'm done, any judge in his right mind will give me a restraining order preventing you from seeing your son. If you love him, sign the papers. If money's more important to you, I'll send you pictures of his high school prom. That will be the next time you see him." I walked out, surprising Uncle Jake. He talked for a few minutes before he walked out. "You should tell me when you're going to do things like that." "Will she sign?" "Her lawyer is working on her. He knows she has no choice but to sign the contract. Now tell me about her dirty secrets." Laughing, I told him I made it up on the spot. He grinned. "Judging by her reaction, she must have some secrets she doesn't want anyone to know about. I think she'll sign." Everyone, especially her old friends, thought I was being a jerk. Screw them. Let them fight for their kids' welfare and see how lenient they'd be. I did extend an olive branch to Gail, though, allowing her to visit Chad for 3 hours under parental supervision. The divorce took place before the criminal trial began, but I made sure to be in the courtroom when it started. The 3 divorces were the result of exposure. Honey's husband also divorced her, using Uncle Jake to get custody of their young daughter. He ended up giving them 3 months in the county jail. Both cried when they were taken out. I ended up with $2,000 in cash and $50 a week in child support. Gail was able to see Chad twice a week under the supervision of Children's Services, but after 2 months, she was allowed unsupervised visits to her parents' home. Chad gradually drifted away from her, and one day she sent her parents a note. She got a job with a national network and was going to travel the East Coast, performing for 6 weeks at one club before moving on to the next. This, she said, was so that clients could see fresh faces. Gail waived her dating privileges, but begged me to let her see him when she was around. The next year, she traveled west and eventually settled in Las Vegas. At least what she was doing was legal there. Chad still got expensive birthday and Christmas presents and letters when he got old enough. He adjusted pretty well to a single-parent family, especially since he had 2 grandparents who were always around. I remarried when he was 12, to a woman about 5 years younger than me. She came with a little 7-year-old daughter, and we sold both houses and bought a bigger one to accommodate all of us. Chad was a little reserved at first, but Melody followed him around like he was a god, and he warmed up to her. About a year later, he surprised Katie, my new wife, by calling her mom, and she tried to hide her tears, but we all saw them. And I took some of the money I made and canceled the foreclosure of affection lawsuits I had filed against Bill and the club manager and bought a half interest in Bobby's business. B&M Construction had grown into a medium-sized business, and we had a good reputation. We did a lot of work for the state through a contractor we worked with the month I was hiding from Gail. Next chapter. When Chad was 24 years old, he came to me with a serious conversation. I met this girl, Dad. I think she might be the one, and I want to bring her to meet you and Mom. She wants to bring her parents with her, if that's okay with you. I think he's afraid to meet you alone. I thought it was odd, but we agreed to invite them over for steaks on the grill. There were always a few girls and a few guys at our house. A year later, she was leaving for college. The nest would definitely be empty without her. We made it clear to her that she should chase her friends away that evening and be on her best behavior. Chad showed up about an hour before the appointed time with his girlfriend in tow. She was cute. Katie caught my eye and grinned. I think she approved of her the moment she volunteered to help with the side dish. I laughed and handed Chad a beer. Yeah, she'll know more about her before dinner than you'll know in your whole life. Pam's a good girl, Dad. She lost her first mother even earlier than I lost mine, and a stepmother is all she's ever known. But that woman is like a mama bear when it comes to her. I've been afraid to hold her hand in her presence for months. At that moment, her parents walked in. Her father shook my hand and grinned. You don't remember me, do you? I had to admit that I didn't. He laughed. That's okay. I've been to your house before about 18 years ago. Chad was 6 and Melody was 2. Even then, I think he was infatuated with her. I'm Jeff, Honey's ex. I shook his hand. Then that means? Yes, Melody is Honey's daughter. Let me assure you that she is nothing like her mother. Not like her at all. She's a good girl, and I won't threaten you if anything goes wrong. Let Amber handle it. Amber was an Amazon, 6 feet tall and weighing 200. I highly doubted she was fat. She smiled to take the malice out of her words, but still let me know she was being serious. I own a dojo and have a black belt in 3 different styles. Amber has 2. She can take care of herself, but just in case she gets hurt, you might want to just shoot yourself. Melody and Katie walked outside and laughed. Mom, you've known him for 3 minutes and you're threatening him? You must be getting soft. I remember a time when you acted like this. Now come into the house and meet my fiancé, C's mother. She stopped suddenly, blushed, and covered her mouth with her hand. I got the feeling she shouldn't have said that. Amber and Katie just stood there for a minute, and then screamed and grabbed Pam in a 3-way hug and dance. Then Melody came out and joined them. Chad and Jeff looked at me. What do we do? Retreat. Let's go sit by the grill. I have a cooler with beer and they won't even miss us. We were already finishing our second beers and laying out our steaks when they remembered us. Still grinning, they sat down and let us serve them like the queens they were. They stayed for 4 hours before they had to leave. The women were in the living room looking at wedding dresses on the computer, and the men retired again, this time to the kitchen. Jeff looked at me. When was the last time you saw Gail? About 15 years ago or more? And you and Honey? 12. You know we don't stand a chance of keeping her at bay once she finds out. I know. I should probably text Gail, though I have no idea if she'll want to come. She'll come. She and Honey are still close, and I'm sure she'll tell her as soon as she finds out. Next chapter. Jeff was right. Honey and Gail had come to the wedding and were sitting in the back, tearing handkerchiefs at an alarming rate. Even though Chad didn't remember his mother, he was polite to her, allowed her to take pictures, and even did a mother-son dance with her. She cried the whole time. I danced with Amber while Jeff danced with Katie, and then Chad led them both out onto the parquet. When Katie came out, she whimpered. She grabbed my hand and said, "Later." And I was standing there watching the couples dance when someone grabbed my hand and pulled me. It was Gail. It felt kind of unreal to dance with her, but she didn't say anything, just held me tightly and then let go and ran off when the music stopped. I didn't dance with Honey, though Jeff did. I watched Amber watching them and wondered if Honey had any idea how close to death she was. The women disappeared into the hall to help the bride remove her dress, and I took the opportunity to sit down in a small alcove, grateful for the silence. I was thinking about how old I'd gotten and smiling at the thought of grandchildren when a hand lay on my shoulder. It was Gail's. I started to get up, but she clung to me. Please stay where you are. I owe you something and I need to pay you back. You asked me to tell you why all these years ago, but I never did. I want to tell you now. May I sit down? I pushed the chair across from me with my foot, and she smiled. As she sat down, she said it was more than she expected. I started to say something, but she put her hands to my lips, a surprisingly intimate gesture. She always did that when I was ranting about something. I'd appreciate it if you'd be quiet and just listen to me so I can tell you everything. She sighed. I did it for the money. We've been living broke and struggling all our lives. All of a sudden, I had a chance to make real money. Honey talked me into it. She even took me to a club and made me watch her dance. She was very good. Later, I came to my senses in bed with Bill. And Honey. I screamed and ran out of the room. There! It's all clean now! Mac will never find out. And you didn't know. I thought you were going to look at me and yell, slut! When you didn't, I started to relax. A few days later, he suggested we have more. I agreed after he promised he wouldn't touch me. I woke up at 4 in the morning in bed with two guys I'd never met. Bill laughed a little and said my share was $100. I never took the money. Bill disappeared for a while and Honey and I stayed on the property. Then the washing machine broke, and Honey said I could make enough in one night to buy a new one. I was disgusted at the thought of going to the laundromat, so I decided to give it a try. I thought I would be ashamed and horrible, but all I felt was a rush of energy, especially when they started throwing money on the stage. I had $180. In those days, people worked hard all week and didn't collect $180. Honey and I agreed to alternate. I'd take Monday, Wednesday, and Friday one week, she'd take Tuesday and Thursday, and the next week we'd switch. During that time, I didn't fool around with anyone but Bill, twice a week. She sighed and took a sip before continuing. I didn't fool around with anyone else until my car broke down. I needed $800 real quick. I was just finishing my set when this drunk guy offered me $200. I hesitated for about a minute before I grabbed his arm and dragged him across the parking lot. He gave me a $50 tip. And then Bill called me into his office and told me that from now on, the Joneses had to pay $15 to use the room. I didn't want that out of my income, so I made them pay it. Things went on until we were arrested. We never found out how they knew about us. Bill paid off the cops and time after time. She stopped, overcome, but grabbed my arm when I tried to stand up. I have to tell you that at the time, I convinced myself I was doing it for us, so we could have a better life. I even set a goal for myself. $60,000, and I was going to quit my job, find a small job somewhere, and say I was making a lot more than I really was, and put that money back into our accounts. When we got caught, that didn't happen. Gail stood up. That was it. I was victimized by greed and stupidity, and it cost me everything. It took me years to come to terms with it, but I've moved on. I'm a successful businessman now. She held out a card to me. Give this to Chad. Tell him I thank him for the invitation, but he has enough family for now. Tell him if he has kids, have him send me pictures. She stopped at the door. Oh, and tell him never to go there. And you too. He can get me by phone or email. If I can give him what he wants, I'll do it. And you too, for that matter. Goodbye, Mac. I highly doubt I'll ever see you again, so live well. Love your wife and daughter and protect them as well as you can. She grinned as she walked through the door. Yes, I named my business after you. Consider it an honorarium. Then she left. I looked at the card. Max, Gentlemen's Club Upper Class. Her number was written on the back. I was still there when Kathy found me. Come on, she said, pulling me by the arm. Let's go home and recover. I grinned as Melody walked over to us. I wouldn't get too comfortable. We'll have to do it all over again in a few years, and this time will be a lot harder on you. We'll get through it. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.